Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar on the State of Washington revision to the Access to Care Standards. I do need to advise everyone that this webinar is being recorded for those unable to attend. This means the entire webinar, including viewed materials, telephonic dialogue, and electronic conversations, become part of public record and therefore subject to public disclosure. No client information, confidential or otherwise, should be shared. Your participation in this webinar is informed consent. Joining me in today's presentation is Larry Horn from Thurston Mason Regional Support Network, Jamie Renaud from Greater Columbia Regional Support Network, Richard Van Cleve from Peninsula Regional Support Network, Michael White from Northtown Mental Health Administration Regional Support Network, and I am Sharon Rushing from the Behavioral Health and Service Integration Administration's Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. To begin, we have a brief overview of your webinar control features. Unfortunately, our time and number of attendees will not allow us to use the raise your hand feature today. Rather, time will be allotted at the end of today's webinar for questions using the questions pane. If we run out of time and are unable to answer all questions submitted, we will address them in a frequently asked questions section that will be created and posted to the DBHR Access to Care Standards and ICD information webpage. Again, today's webinar and the Access to Care Standards and other useful information and links will be posted to the DBHR website on the newly created Access to Care Standards ICD webpage. Please visit the URL link posted on this slide. The link to this page will also be distributed via email to all of today's webinar attendees. I would like to also note that you now may submit Access to Care Standards questions to the Access to Care ICD work group at the email address on this slide. When questions are submitted to this inbox, they will be reviewed and answered by the work group as quickly as possible. So to begin our presentation today, we would like to provide you with a little background as to the how and why of the Access to Care Standards. The intention of the Access to Care Standards and what they provide. The Access to Care Standards provide initial entrance criteria. The Access to Care Standards do not provide sole criteria for continued stay or level of care. The statewide Access to Care Standards describe the minimum standards and entrance criteria into the state's Regional Support Network, or RSN, care delivery system. In addition to entrance criteria, Access to Care Standards provide Regional Support Network with rules to determine authorization eligibility for mental health services. And in the very near future, with Behavioral Health Organization, or BHO, integration, the Access to Care Standards will undergo yet further revisions to incorporate substance use disorder, SUD, and chemical dependency, CD, criteria. The Access to Care Standards began 30 years ago to establish medical treatment policy for those with a major mental illness. The state of Washington needed a standardized way to determine those who were eligible for care. A little more background. In 2002, the President's new Freedom Commission was formed to look at the mental health delivery system in communities. The first Access to Care Standards work group for Washington was formed at this time. In 2002, the group created the first eligibility and authorization criteria for mental health services, known as the Access to Care Standards. These standards were established and made available for RSNs to use in January of 2003. More recently, in 2014, with the International Classification of Diseases, the ICD-10 coding manual, and Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, known as the DSM-5 implementation, DBHR reconvened the now Access to Care Standards Work Group in December of 2013. There were significant changes in the DSM-5 revision that required changes to the Access to Care Standards. One of these changes was to the Global Assessment of Functioning, known as the GAF, that we will talk about in further detail later on in today's presentation. To address these changes, DBHR formed the Access to Care Standards ICD-10 work group. The work group desired a standardized way to help providers identify eligible diagnoses and determine functional impairment. Access to Care does not address or endorse specific services. Access to Care does provide standardized methodology and guidance to entrance requirements. Who was involved in the Access to Care Standards work group? Well, as you can see by this list, we had a number of talented and skilled individuals come together throughout the state of Washington where lively discussions took place, national research of functional impairment tools, a line-by-line, diagnoses-by-diagnoses code review and evaluation, data analysis, and sub-work groups met. The end result is the project of what we will review with you today. So what were the goals of the Access to Care Standards work group? The work group decided that we wanted to ensure mental health treatment for those who need it within the scope of the current regional support network system. We wanted to maintain integrity of the regional support network community mental health system and not to overload the current RSN system. We also wanted to include the correct and updated diagnoses in the revised Access to Care Standards.